Okay, so we talked about this where a balloon payment is a very large final payment. And all the previous payments are relatively low. Okay. An interest-only balloon mortgage is where you only pay the interest payments. So you take out, say, a $120 home loan for 15 years. For that 15 years, all the way up to the last payment, you're only paying the interest. You take the interest on the total loan and they split it up and make the payments. And so every month the payment you're making is just interest, interest only. And then the very last payment is $120,000, the amount of the loan. Balloon payments are a gamble. People are gambling that they'll make these small payments now, and they'll either refinance before that balloon payment is due, maybe because they'll have better credit or something, and so they can refinance later, or they're gambling that, for example, if they're running a business, they're going to make all this money between now and then, and they'll be able to make that big payment at the end. But it is a gamble, because what happens, or maybe they don't plan on staying in the house. Maybe they plan on selling it or something, you know. But life happens. Maybe you can't refinance. Nobody will refinance you, or you can't get out from under the house before the balloon payment's due, and suddenly there's this $120,000 payment due on your house, and you can't pay it. So it gets repossessed. And you've been making interest payments for 15 years. Do you know what I mean? So you want to be very, very cautious if looking into something like this. So Chris and Scott are opening a restaurant, and they're going to take out a loan, 6.1%, 15-year, $300,000 loan on the building. They think that they're going to do a lot better in the future, so they're going to pay an interest-only balloon mortgage. This is what they're going to choose to do. I should say there. Okay, anyway, terrible typing in this one. So they're going to do an interest-only balloon mortgage. So first, what we have to do, okay, they're going to take out a $30,000 mortgage. So first we have to find the monthly payment. I said 30,000, I meant 300,000. So I have the rate divided by 12, 1 plus the rate divided by 12. The rate is 6.1, not 6.2. And we're talking 15 years. Okay. First things first, 12 times 15 is 180. So they'll be making 180 payments. Okay. The next thing I do is 0.061 divided by 12. And I'm rounding, obviously. Okay. Now, I take the 1 plus 0.0051 and I raise that, so that's 1.0051 to the power of 180. So this is first, right here. Okay. So I'm going to rewrite this. It's going to be 300,000 times 0.0051 times 2.49844. I'm going to have the same answer for this part. They're the same. Okay. Now they don't cancel because of that minus 1. Okay. So that's going to equal, so I multiply 0.0051 and 300,000. Okay, I multiply all of these, I subtract 1 from the denominator, and then I divide. So the monthly payment on this loan should be this. Hold on. Where? 0. With, $2,500 a month when you're starting a brand new business. Okay, so the regular payment, and they're making 180 of them. This is how much they owe the bank. This is how much they have to pay. But they took out a $300,000 loan and they want to pay interest only. So they want to pay interest only until the last payment. There are 180 total payments. That's not even close to total. And they're going to do a balloon payment. That leaves them 179 interest payments. So far, are you following me? Yes? No? Okay. So we're going to take this $159,191.37, and we're going to divide it by 179 interest-only payments. So they're going to pay $889.34, 179 times. And then their last payment is going to be the original $300,000. Remember we had that problem in an earlier chapter where you took out a mortgage on a $400,000 house and it ended up costing like $1.5 million or something like that? You need to look at that because you're going to pay more than you can buy what you're buying the house for. If you buy a $100,000 house, you're going to pay $200,000 to $250,000 for that house probably. You need to evaluate, is this house going to be worth $250,000? Right, that's what I said, including interest. So you want to look at that. You want to look at the down payment requirements. Are you going to even be able to make the required down payment? Before you even go further into the process and waste a bunch of your time, if you can't, if you know they require 15% down and you only have 10% down, then you're going to have to wait. Just things like that. They say location, location, location. Location. Let's say you're getting ready to buy a house right now. You don't have any kids. You may or may not have kids someday. You're not married, whatever. You still need to take that into consideration that, like, if you think that maybe someday you might, perhaps, maybe want kids, You want to take that into account when you're buying your house. Like where you buy your house, you want to make sure it's not in a bad school district. Not like maybe there's parks nearby, or you know, like you can have the most fantastic house, but if it's in the middle of the hood, do you want it? You know what I mean? Like you need to consider these things. Is it too close to a railroad track, the airport, or a freeway? Noise. You know, there's some really great, beautiful property out by the Sanford Airport for cheap. If you don't mind a plane flying, like, I mean, it's near the airport, so they'll be like, you know, right above your house when they're landing. You know how loud that is? That's why that property is cheap. Yeah, I mean, all kinds of stuff. So, you know, these things. Lots. Yeah, I don't know. At the very least, at least once an hour, or at the you know, at least once an hour. So you're talking about 24 planes a day. That's a lot, but it's loud. Size of the house. Oops. Size. So you're looking at number of rooms and the size of the rooms. If you're single and you're buying your own first house and it's only got one bathroom, no big deal. But if you might maybe perhaps someday might have kids, you want 2 bathrooms. Maybe 3. Just saying. You also want to look at the size of the property it's on. Okay, and this can go either way. Maybe you want a lot of property. You don't like maybe necessarily want to see or hear your neighbors, and so you want big property. Or maybe you think, I don't really care to mow all that much, so I want a nice tiny little yard. I don't have to really work, you know, it's tiny, not a lot of work. You know, it can go either way. You want to look at the condition of the house and the property. A lot of times you look at a yard with really bad landscaping and it's like, oh, it's no big deal. You just dig out those ugly old plants, put in some new ones. It's a big deal. It's a lot of work.
Like having a real nice palm tree on your property, doesn't that add a lot of value?
Yeah, that depends. I hate palm trees. I think they're ugly. As a matter of fact, I have one in my front yard. If you want to come dig it out, you can have it. Also, though, the condition of the house, you know, you can get a really good deal on a fixer-upper. Sure, if you can do all the fixer-uppering yourself, it's a good deal. But if you have to hire a bunch of contractors and stuff, it could cost more than the house was even worth. Okay, so you want to look at the type of heating and cooling. A lot of old houses in Florida don't have air conditioning, even though they really should because it's Florida, but they don't. If you're up north, you don't want an electric heating system. You want like gas or boiler heating system because otherwise it's too expensive. You know, I mean, so that's like you want to look at that. You want to look at the BTUs. For the reasons that I mentioned, if it's not enough BTUs, you're going to spend a lot of money trying to heat and cool, mostly cool. The while over 60. While. Yeah. But too much BTUs, the house cools down before all the moisture's out of the air and you're looking at a mold problem. And that's like kind of an indicator if there's a house that has just too big of an air conditioner unit, you'd want to have it tested for mold before you bought it because there could be a mold issue because of the moisture. And as you know, that's dangerous and bad and it causes cancer and all kinds of stuff. And then you want to look at the approximate monthly cost of running the house. Because even if you get a great deal, for example, let's say we just hypothetically we live in England. And there's this castle up the street and it's for sale and you can buy it. It's a really great deal. It's really cheap. But you know how much it costs to heat a castle? You know, like heating, right? Yeah. So, but I mean, you want to look at, even if you can get a bigger house, like you can afford to buy a big old giant house with like cathedral ceilings and stuff, that all, actually the same square foot house with cathedral ceilings versus without cathedral ceilings can almost double your electric bill. Did you guys know that? There's more air to cool. So you've got, so you want to look at that, like what is the approximate monthly cost of running this house? How much is the average electric bill here? It makes the room look bigger. It gives the illusion of a larger room so that you feel like you have a bigger, more space. So these are the things you want to think about beforehand. Then we have recurring, non-recurring closing costs, something called an earnest money deposit. We're going to go all over this. This is all the stuff that goes into actually buying the house. Pause. Okay, there are recurring costs and non-recurring costs of owning a house. Recurring costs occur on a regular basis, so your mortgage, your insurance, your property tax, these are recurring. Non-recurring costs are just the one-time costs associated with buying the house, moving, closing costs, down payment. The closing is the last meeting. So buying a house is a negotiation, and it can take 30 days or it can take months, depending on how much you go back and forth with the owner about things. But when everything is said and done and everybody's agreed on everything, then you go to what's called the closing. And the closing is the final meeting between the seller, the buyer, their attorneys, and a bank representative or whoever's loaning the money for the house. And this is where the official sale is occurring. All the paperwork gets signed here. Do you absolutely 100% need an attorney to buy a house? No, it's not required, but it is recommended because there's a lot of paperwork and it's all written in a bunch of legal jargon. And it's good to have somebody that's trained in legal jargon to look over it and catch anything you might miss. Okay, the closing costs are the costs that are associated with the closing, and the buyer is responsible for these. Buyers pay the closing costs. The only time that is not true is, I don't know if you guys will hear like Lexmark's Homes or some of the other, I can't even think of the names of them, but some of the other big home manufacturing neighborhoods, they come in and they build a whole neighborhood and they put commercials online or on the radio or whatever, and they'll say, we'll pay the closing costs for you. Other than that, buyer has to pay them. And they vary from state to state, and we're going to go over the most common ones. And the first is an earnest money deposit. It's a good faith deposit. Okay. It is money paid to the seller by the buyer to show that you're serious about buying the house. It's kind of like a holding deposit. So during the negotiations, when you're going back and forth, you say, yeah, I want to buy the house. You shouldn't sell it to anybody else. I'm going to buy the house. And then you start the negotiating process. By giving them an earnest money deposit, you're showing them that really you are serious about buying the house and that they shouldn't really should not show it to other people and sell it out from under you. It's kind of like a holding deposit. You guys know what attorney fees are? That's the money you pay the lawyer. So you pay them their attorney fees to represent you at the closing. Most attorneys representing you at the closing will charge a flat fee. Like they have like a flat fee for that. It's not like a per hourly thing. Then you have something called an origination fee. This is money that you pay to the bank to to pay for the paperwork that they have to print out to loan you the money for the loan application. Oh, absolutely. The origination fees vary by bank. There's not some set amount. It could be, $20 or $30 or $40, or it could be a couple $100. It just depends. The title, also known as the deed, is the legal claim of ownership of the property. You get these for houses. You get title for your car, camper, boat. Mobile homes have titles. Motorcycles have titles. Probably anything that you'd have to register would have a title. So any vehicle you'd have to register, ATVs or anything like that might have titles also. I'm not really sure. I don't think you have to register those, do you?
What?
ATVs?
I do.
It depends on what they are. Like right now, it's all boats.
Okay.
Actually, I think so. You can register.
But anything that you'd have to register, you'd have a title for. Yeah, jet skis, boats. No. The title search is conducted before you do the closing, and this is to make sure the person selling the house actually legally owns the house. Sometimes there are title issues. Like, for example, let's say person A sold the house to person B, and then when person B did the title transfer and stuff, they didn't do it correctly. And then you go to buy it from person B, but they don't technically legally own it. Person A still does. You want to find that out beforehand, otherwise you won't be able to file your title. Also, back during the housing collapse, there were people out there that were going and breaking into and rekeying foreclosed houses and then selling them like they owned them, because people would abandon the house. And then other people would go in and prey upon new people and sell them the house that they didn't actually own. And now, did they end up getting all the money, the $100,000 or whatever that was? Probably not, but they got away with the down payments and things. So you always do the title search first to make sure that they really own it, for, to make sure that you can do your paperwork, or to make sure that there's not something nefarious going on.
Yeah, my dad, like when he tries to sell things, he always tries to like anytime the title, he'll try to search for it. He's got the person that works for our case, so he
Absolutely, yeah.
everything.
Yeah, exactly. Points. Points are extra fees charged by the lender for the use of their money. This is on top of interest, and it's about 1% per point. So if you take out a $10,000 loan, it's 1% of 10,000 would be $100 per point. And there's two kinds of points, which we'll go over on the next slide. And whether or not the bank or whoever's lending you the money charges points is, again, that's a per bank thing. Some do, some don't. Origination points are like origination fees. Fees get paid up front, and they're collected to pay for the loan application process. Discount points reduce the interest of the loan from 0.25% to, what is that, 375? That's like an eighth of, no. Hold on a second. Okay, so 3/8 of a percent. So here's what happens. The points charge you 1% per $1,000 of your loan. Or sorry, 1% per point, not per 1,000. 1% per point. But they'll reduce your interest 0.25% to 3/8 of a percent, so almost a half. And so people think that they're getting a good deal because they're like, oh, well, I pay these discount points up front and then they reduce my interest. Well, except you're paying 1% to get knocked off 0.25%. Okay, now I want to talk about prepaid interest, but before I talk about prepaid interest, I want to talk about arrears. Okay, arrears is paid after the fact. Like after, so interest on a mortgage is paid in arrears, which means to say if you took out the loan April 1st, on May 1st, you're going to pay the interest that accumulated in April. On June 1st, you're going to pay the interest that accumulated in May. Does that make sense? So you're always paying for the prior month's interest. Not like when you rent a place, you pay up front. So like if I pay rent on May 1st, I'm paying for the month of May. If I pay my mortgage on May 1st, I'm paying for the month of April. Does that make sense? You can't pay interest until it's accumulated. So on May 1st, when you pay that May 1st mortgage payment, you're paying for the interest that grew in April. Whereas like if you're renting a place, when you pay your rent on May 1st, you're paying for May. So it's kind of backwards. But what prepaid interest is, and it's kind of a misnomer, it sounds like you're prepaying interest, but you're really not. What you're doing is you're paying interest at the closing. That accumulated in the month before. Now, it may not be a whole month. So, for example, let's say I'm closing on the 10th or whatever. Let's say I took the loan out on the 10th, but I don't close till the end of the month. Like the closing doesn't happen, so then I have to pay the interest that accumulated between the 10th and the day I closed at the end of the month. So I have to pay that 20 days worth of interest, and then I go into my regular mortgages. Does that make sense? No, because the loan has to be completely taken care of and arranged before you can close on the house. Because on the closing, the bank is going to give the check to the seller. So that all has to be taken care of ahead of time. So there's going to be a period of some days since you've taken out the loan before you close on the house. That's the interest that you have to pay for at closing. Does that make sense? And so it says it's prepaid interest, but it's not really prepaid because it's accumulated in those however many days, but you're prepaying interest before you actually start paying a mortgage. So it's not getting tacked on to like your first mortgage payment. Because otherwise it would tack it onto your first mortgage payment. Your first mortgage payment would have to be higher. Does that make sense? So it sounds like, oh, I'm prepaying it ahead of time. I'm paying it ahead of time, but you're not paying it ahead of time. Interest is always paid after the fact, after it accumulates. Okay, we got time for one. All right, Leah and Josh are buying a really expensive house. And they've got a 6.7 or 7.25 interest. They're making a 15% down payment. They're closing on September 6th. And we want to know how much they have to pay in prepaid interest at closing. So first we got to figure out their down payment and take that out of the house. So we take the $600,000 and we multiply it by 15%, and they are paying $90,000 down. Okay. And that means my pen is being weird. They're taking out a $510,000 loan. So far, okay? So $90,000 down means that they don't pay that. Now, they have to pay interest, and we figure out how much interest per year. We're going to take the first year only, and we're going to take that $510,000 and we're going to multiply it by 0.0725. And that's the total of the first year's interest. Okay. Now, we're going to separate that into interest per day. We're going to take that 36,975 and we're going to divide it by 365 days in a year. And we're going to get $101.30 per day in interest. Think about that for a second. They're going to be paying $101 a day in interest on this house per day. Yeah, crazy, isn't it? That's the first year. That'll change every year that goes down, which we'll talk about too. Now, they are closing on September 6th. The loan is starting, so we have to pay the 1st through the 6th. So, sorry, no, the 1st, not the 1st through the 6th. We have to pay the 6th through the 30th. Because we have to pay that first month's of interest, right? So, that's 24 days times $101.30 per day, and that's going to be $2,431.20 in interest. Because they're closing on the September 6th, but they're going to have to pay that first month's interest. So what's going to happen is they're probably not going to, you don't move in the day you close. You move in the 1st of the following month. So they're going to pay the 6th through the 30th. Right, so we want to figure out the prepaid interest on a $400,000 loan that's closing on December 17th. Okay, so December 17th, there's 30 days in December. So that means we have to pay for 13 days. So far, okay? We have $400,000 loan with an APR of 6%. So we're going to multiply 400,000 times 6%. And our our interest for the year is $24,000. We'll take that $24,000 and we're going to divide it by 365 to find our interest per day. $65.75 per day, and we're paying for 13 days of December. So $65.75 times 13 is $854.75. So that's our prepaid interest. Leah and Josh from our example back here, they're buying a $600,000 house. And they know they're going to have to bring their checkbook because they have to pay money. How much might they expect to pay in total at the closing? Okay. Closing costs run 2 to 7% of the cost of the home. Now, that's for everything. And it'll vary. This is what you have to bring to the closing. Like how much you'd have to pay at the closing. Yeah. And it'll vary. It varies that 5% based on like where you're doing the closing. And, you know, if you have to pay points, if you have to pay an attorney, if you have to pay origination fees or origination points, like all those different things. And it's state by state and bank by bank. So it'll really depend, and that's why there's that 5% range. And 5% doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, 5% is a big range. So if we look at their $600,000 house, they're going to be paying between 2 and 7%. And this is just a good thing to know about how much you might have to pay so you can prepare for it ahead of time. So 2% of 600,000 is $12,000. 7% of 600,000 is $42,000. So at the closing, they're going to have to pay somewhere between $12,000 and $42,000. Somewhere between those two numbers.